force of nature, a living weapon. Comic books and summer blockbuster movies shower him with praise and unwavering love. But strength like this, it was never meant for good. It was meant for harm. He was bred for violence, for death. Hundreds have died by his hands. Some begged, some pleaded, some tried to run, and sadly, some never saw it coming. He tore through them all the same. But now, the monster is tired. This inhuman human being is done. The world's most devastating serial killer wants to die. Welcome back. I'm your host, Michael. This is Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. Season 1, The Oleander Files. File number 398. This is the tragic tale of the Strong Man. Let's begin. Meet Victor Kane. Some say the world's strongest man, and possibly the world's deadliest killer. Victor Kane was born in 1971 in Black Hollow, a forgotten village buried deep in the fog-choked moors of northern England. The Kane family had lived in the region for centuries, their bloodline filled with men known for unnatural strength and violent tempers. His father was a bare-knuckle boxer with a wicked drinking problem. Sadly, his mother died giving birth, and his father raised Victor the only way he knew how, through brutality. By the time Victor was 8, he could bend iron bars. By 12, he could lift a grown man over his head. By 14, he could lift the back end of the family tractor. And unfortunately, by this time, he had already taken his first life. His first kill was Alice Finch, a schoolgirl who had the misfortune of teasing him. It wasn't meant to happen. She tried shoving him, and he shoved back, but his unnatural strength was unforgiving. Her skull cracked against the stone pavement of the schoolyard. Children screamed. Teachers rushed to her side. But Victor just stood there, staring at his hands, feeling nothing. The authorities ruled it an accident, but the people of Black Hollow, they knew the truth. After that, wherever he went, the villagers would whisper, "That boy is dangerous. He's not human. His whole family is cursed." Shortly after, Victor was expelled, locked inside his father's crumbling estate, where he encouraged his son's violence. To make ends meet, he forced him to fight grown men in secret pit fights. But having his preteen son beat these men was not enough. He forced Victor to break bones. Devastation for the glory of a win. Life went like this for a while for Victor. Some say accidents kept happening around him because of his unnatural strength. And by the time he turned 18, his father was dead. His skull caved in by his own son's fists. Victor didn't even flee. He simply walked away. He had learned nobody had the courage to stop him. And even if they tried, his body was so strong now that it even scared him. This led him to hate his hometown and the people from there. His strength, which could have been a gift, felt like a curse to him. For even when he didn't try to hurt somebody, he did. And by the time he grew old enough to control this unfortunate strength, he didn't care anymore. For that decade, England bled. Victor drifted from town to town, never staying long, leaving behind a trail of broken bodies and shattered skulls. He had no preferred method. Sometimes he crushed throats with his bare hands. Sometimes he snapped spines. Sometimes he simply beat people until unrecognizable pulp. His first true massacre happened in 1994 at a roadside pub near Manchester. A drunken patron made a comment about his size, laughing and stuttering as he called Victor a lumbering freak. Everyone in the pub laughed, and so did Victor, until they realized he was not laughing with them. He was laughing at them. Gruesomely, he tore the arms off the drunken patron in front of the entire bar. And by the time the police arrived, the pub was painted in blood. Every patron dead. It was the first time the press gave him a name. Fear the strong man. The butcher of Moorland. Sadly, this was just the beginning. In 1995, a traveling circus was found in ruins outside Leeds. Every so-called strongman, every bouncer, every security guard ripped apart, their bones shattered. In 1999, a group of London gangsters made the mistake of hiring Victor as muscle. Within a week, they were dead. He had killed them for fun. In 2003, the cult in the Midlands attempted to recruit him, believing him to be some kind of divine force. And that he was. He slaughtered them all. In 2008, a team of mercenaries hired by the British government attempted to subdue him in an abandoned factory. They lasted 8 minutes before he reduced them to twitching corpses. By 2013, the body count had surpassed 400. No one could stop him. No one could match him. A few years later, England's top authorities had abandoned conventional law enforcement and reached out for help. They reached out to the US government to help put an enforcement squad together, built directly to kill Victor. And that's where my great uncle and his team come in. It only took 72 hours for my great uncle and the English Special Unit team to track down Victor Kane. He had been held up in an old abandoned mansion that had no power, no running water. And when my uncle found him, he was sitting on an old, beat-up couch, staring at the shadows along the wall. According to my uncle, Victor was massive. He said he was the size of a polar bear and as broad as a chest of drawers that you could step into. But surprisingly, the one thing he wasn't when they found him was hostile or even violent. He actually seemed docile, subdued, sad. When my uncle and his team surrounded him, ready to put a bullet in every side of his head. Victor just looked up at my uncle with a broken yet soft smile, and he rumbled, "Finally." But there was something different in Victor's eyes, something that connected with my great uncle. He didn't see a murderer there, a serial killer. He saw a Superman who was never taught how to use his powers for good. The inevitable outcome from years of pain and hate and distrust. Though the rest of his team disagreed, my great uncle decided not to end Victor that night. And instead, they took him into custody, something no one had ever been able to do before. And that's where our real story begins. Traveling the back roads of a lost England town, my great uncle and his team sat inside a well-armored bus with Victor Kane in the middle. As they drove towards the authorities' headquarters to turn Victor in, my great uncle tried to make small talk with him, but Victor was having none of it. The only thing Victor would say is, "I'm tired." About a half hour away from their destination, my great uncle Samuel finally gave up on trying to connect with this human beast. He sat tucked against the seat, studying his file, reading it from front to back over and over again as the armored bus rattled down the road. The flash of lightning illuminated the inside of the vehicle, bringing with it the first drops of rain. Victor lifted his head and inhaled the smell. He looked like a little kid enjoying the first day of rain in spring. But after a few minutes, the rain began to fall harder, becoming a torrent, making the roads slippery and dangerous. That set my great uncle's teeth on edge, as he did not have a good feeling about how this night was going to end. And just then, the driver slammed on the brakes. The tires locked up, screeching everywhere, as the bus slid sideways on the wet pavement. My uncle screamed out, "What the hell are you doing?" The driver said, "I almost hit it. Didn't you see it?" As the driver continued to struggle, getting the bus back under control, my uncle was able to focus just outside the window as he watched this dark shadow disappear on the other side of the street into the dark wilderness. It was long and on 4 legs, but looked like it had a giant head and snout. He stood up, bracing himself to try to get a better look, when the driver hollered, "Oh shit!" And that's when another shadow cut across in front of them again, causing him to swerve and run into a long, thick, muddy trench that locked up one of the tires in a loud thud, thrusting the backside of the bus around until it was spun diagonally across the street. And there it came to a rest. The rain was pouring harder now, and everybody was in a panic. Everybody except Victor. He just sat, chained up, in the middle of this vehicle, with a weird smirk on his face. And that's when a pair of automobile lights cut through the night and the pouring rain around the corner. Too fast, the car collided into the back end of the bus, causing it to slide on the slippery street just enough to catch the tail end of the even muddier side street. Unfortunately, it was partially a ditch, and the top-heavy armored bus slowly tipped over on its side. Windows cracked, steel squealed, and the engine whined. The car that had collided with them spun off to the other side of the road, and there was no movement, just billowing smoke coming from its engine. My uncle and his team It all took too much damage in the hit. My uncle had hit his head and he knew he had a concussion, and he was just trying not to pass out. The driver, in a panic, unbuckled himself, throwing open emergency side door, and jumped out. My great uncle yelled to him, "Hold on. We have to make sure the package is secure." Victor laughed. "You called me the package." He was laying on his side, still chained up, and he looked as content as could be. My uncle, on the other hand, called to the other teammates, 2 which were now immobilized with concussions. One of the British team members, though, said, "I got it," and pulled himself from the wreckage through one of the broken windows to try to catch and calm the driver, who had made his way to the other vehicle as they realized there were no survivors. Lightning crackled over the top of them, followed by thunder, and then another noise that no one expected. Guttural moaning and growls came from the foliage off the side of the road. The driver called out through the rain, "That's where I saw that thing." Suddenly, a pair of bright yellow eyes appeared in the darkness. They were unnatural and lizard-like. The growls became louder, and then more pairs of eyes showed themselves. The British soldier grabbed the driver and said, "Let's get back inside the bus." But in shock, the driver hesitated, and in that moment, the attack began. 4-legged creatures with long snouts and razor-like teeth and claws, with tails like an alligator and scales like an ancient dragon, launched from the trees, covering the damaged vehicle like ants, their teeth ripping through the metal before finding the lifeless victims inside. They tore into the flesh, eating them with clicks and chomps that were even louder than the giant falling drops of rain. My uncle watched this from afar, trying to get his bearings inside the crooked bus. He managed to find the keys to unlock Victor's chains. He looked at him and asked Victor, "You saw that, right?" Victor said nothing. "Now I think, before this night's over, we're going to need your help, Victor." Victor shrugged and looked away from my uncle. That's when the screams and the gunfire started outside. Now, there were at least a dozen of the creatures. They had already half-eaten the driver and were bearing down on the lone soldier as he shot every round, not having any effect on any of the creatures. He lasted less than 45 seconds. The world began to spin as my uncle fought the waves of nausea and dizziness as the world seemed to turn to black. And when my uncle tumbled sideways and fell over, almost succumbing to the blackness, it's when the first creature scraped its claws along the side of the armored bus. And then another one slammed its head through a window, greeting Victor with a wicked smile of bloody teeth. Victor sighed and said, "Oh, you want to play?" In one motion, he snapped the chains that were binding his hands and his feet and sat himself straight up. The first creature, who was now halfway hanging inside the bus, focused on my great uncle and lunged for him just feet away from Victor. Victor caught it by its neck in the air just before its teeth found my uncle's face. Victor immediately squeezed his giant fist, and the creature's neck snapped in two, lifeless, hanging there. He threw it behind him, grabbed my uncle, and dragged him through the bus, kicking the doors at the back of the bus off their hinges. They crashed onto the concrete. He threw my great uncle into the muddy ditch, onto his back. The rain fell on his face. It was just cold enough to keep him awake. As he witnessed what happened next, Victor stood up, popping the bones in his back, stretched his giant arms and hands, knuckles popping, when two of the monsters attacked him. One latched onto his thigh, while the other jumped through the air with its jaws closing on his broad shoulder and neck. Victor swiftly punched the top of the head of the monster on his leg, crushing its skull in one swipe. It fell dead onto the ground and immediately grabbed at the one that had now buried its jaws into his neck. Blood started running down his back and chest. He grabbed its leg and its tail and ripped it from his flesh with the ease of removing a band-aid. He grabbed the creature and ripped it in half, throwing both halves across each side of the street. As blood poured from his neck and shoulder, it was the first time my uncle actually saw emotion on his face, and it was anger. Victor turned and looked as another dozen or so monsters readied their attack. They were all focused on him, and not my uncle now. In the distance, about 300 yards from the road, was an old rundown farm. There was a barn that still managed to be upright. Without thinking, Victor picked up my great uncle Sam, threw him over his shoulder, and ran for the property. As big as he was, you wouldn't think he could move as fast as he did, but he made it to the barn in under 30 seconds. He set my uncle down, who was barely conscious now, but he managed to ask, "What are you doing?" Victor said, "Making up for my shitty past." Outside the barn, a furious chorus of growls and bellowing monsters surrounded them. The rain fell hard and thick, hiding most of their features, so all you could see were their bright yellow eyes, and what little light there was gleamed off their scales and their wet, bloody teeth. Victor stomped his foot and said, "I'll be right back." He made his way out of the barn and immediately was attacked. The sound of a bloody battle ensued. Bones crunching, claws scraping, growls, yipes, death moans, they all followed. And when the final thud of the last creature hit the wall of the barn, my Uncle Sam took a deep breath. Suddenly, the barn door flew open, and Victor stumbled through, blocking out most of the moonlight with his huge torso. My uncle noticed that this time, Victor had sustained plenty of damage. He was missing chunks of his hair. Half of his body was covered in blood. Bite marks were along his cheeks, neck, and both forearms. His pants had been shredded, and it looked like he was missing some of the skin on his right leg. He asked Victor, "Are you okay?" He just nodded, and then sat down in a huff. "How many more are out there?" He grumbled, "Don't know." My great uncle looked at his watch and said, "Well, it's 4 hours till daylight. And if the other members of the team put in a call before they died, we're at least 27 minutes out from help." A crash of lightning flickered everywhere, highlighting the landscape around the barn and old farm, which now was engulfed in an outline of at least 100 shadows of the reptilian creatures. My great uncle Samuel's eyes grew big, and he let out a soft breath and said, Fuck, it's gonna be a long night. His head began to spin, and he fell over backwards, trying his hardest to stay conscious. Victor sighed, climbed to his feet once again without a word, and walked out the barn door. The rain was falling harder, and as soon as he stepped out, a choir of howls and growls and jaws snapping closed rattled everywhere. Victor shook the rain from his face and ran towards the horde. My uncle said this time Victor was out there for 10 minutes, and the sounds that those animals made as they all succumbed to the will and strength of Victor, the strong man. Again, he stumbled back through the barn door, this time with a noticeable limp and a wheeze in his voice. He was now almost covered entirely in his own blood. One of his arms was shredded down to the bone, with tendons and muscles dangling. One of his shoulders had a giant bite that had removed a giant chunk of his flesh. He had been completely scalped now, and one of his feet was badly mangled. His back were covered in giant scratches that were gushing blood. My uncle managed to get to him and help him sit back down. And as he did, Victor nodded and mumbled, "Thank you." Now Uncle Sam knew he was in bad shape, and even though he was feeling a little bit better from his obvious concussion, he knew he was in no shape to help. But he tried to ease Victor. He said, "Don't worry, Victor. Help should be here in just a few minutes." Victor smiled and said, "That's if one of your teammates were able to make that call for help. And I'll be honest, sir, they all died pretty fast." My uncle swallowed hard, knowing he was probably right. And as Victor's new wounds sunk in, my great uncle knew Victor wouldn't have much time left either. That's when a crash on the roof of the barn signaled the third wave of these deadly monsters. Their growls grew again. Not as many as the last horde, but enough for them both to realize they probably weren't getting out of here alive. My uncle readied himself, even though he was in no condition to fight. But Victor placed a calm hand on his shoulder and shook his head no and said, "I've got this, sir. Don't you worry." Uncle Sam replied, "Victor, they're gonna kill you. You can't keep this up." He shrugged his shoulders and smiled. "You're probably right, sir. But I think you're a good man. And I know I'm a bad man. So, if you don't mind, I think I'd like to end my journey trying to keep a good man alive." My uncle was speechless, and before he could say anything, Victor had stumbled back outside. He took a moment, letting the rain wash all the blood and pain off of him, and within seconds, he was engulfed again with a dozen new attackers. The sounds of death and bones crunching were everywhere, flesh ripping, only drowned out by the distant rumble of thunder. And after a few more minutes, everything fell silent, except the rain, which now seemed to lighten a bit. In the dark shadows of the barn, my uncle waited, but he heard nothing. No growls, no footsteps, no breathing, just gentle rain on the walls of the barn. And just when he had given up all hope, the barn door slid open slowly, and in tumbled Victor, who was now not much more than a skinless carcass. His muscles and tendons shone brightly with blood and pus. Bones jutted from his neck and ribs, forearms, femurs, and one of his feet was completely missing. He was a walking, bloody corpse. Victor collapsed to the ground. Uncle Sam tried his best to soften his landing, and as my uncle got a better look at him, he couldn't believe that he was still alive. No one can sustain these kinds of wounds and still be breathing. No one except the strong man. No more creatures returned that evening. Victor had killed them all. And in the quiet moments just before dawn, Victor Kane succumbed to his wounds. He died peacefully and quietly, but just before he passed, he told my uncle something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He said, "I know I'm a bad man, and I've hurt many, many people. Some of them deserved it, but others I didn't mean to kill. It's just my curse, a curse that I wanted to break, and for once, be a good man and save a life." With his last breath, he asked my great Uncle Sam, "Did I do good? Did I save a good man?" My uncle never answered that question, but I'll answer it now. Yes, Victor Kane, the world's strongest and most deadly man, you saved a good man. Now, fellow gardeners, let's get you up to date on the crazy activities going on in my world. First off, somebody's starting to mess with me at work. I think they're trying to get me fired. Whether it has anything to do with this podcast, I don't know yet. And my brother, who I discussed in an earlier episode, he's not responding to me anymore. He moved away, but now he won't answer my calls. It makes me wonder if this is all worth it. And finally, I was so fed up over the weekend at the gray van that keeps stalking me and parking outside of my home that I grabbed a baseball bat and ran across the street. But when I got there was nobody in the van. It was abandoned. I called the cops. They told me to handle it. Call a tow truck. So I did. But by the time they got there, the van was missing again. One step forward, two steps back. The next episode should get people talking. It's on a subject that is very popular and has always been very popular. Join me when we tackle aliens. This has been Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. Season 1, The Oleander Files. My name is Michael, and just like this story, monsters are real. But sometimes, even monsters have a heart of gold.